Hello, and welcome to Replay Value. Step on down to Hyouka's OVA episode where the swimsuits are fitting, the sun is shining, and the camera has this weird compulsion. Indeed, it's time for the pool episode. So before we even get into the analysis, let's talk about the common critique of the episode as a fan service episode. If you, like me, define fan service as titillation that only exists for the sake of the audience with no narrative reason, then this episode has a strong case against being labeled as fan service. Hyouka has an in-universe reason for the camera to behave the way it does. Hotaro is our focal point and he's explicitly attracted to Chitanda. The fact that Mayaka is treated mostly differently is evidence for that, though this episode 100% falls into the same male gaze trappings that are inherent to beach and pool episodes in anime, or almost anything visual depending on how deep you go. And I said that Mayaka is treated mostly differently, not entirely. And that's why I come down on this episode as being fan service, which I don't feel is an inherently negative trait. But even if you do, it's vastly better than the majority of material that choose similar locales. I don't know if that matters or if any of this matters. It doesn't detract from the narrative in my opinion, but I thought we should talk about the white elephant in the room before talking about the episode itself. The OVA begins with Tomoe returning home and marking the first time we've seen her. After all of her indirect influence over the previous two arcs, here she asserts direct influence on Hotaro by getting him to work at the pool. But her introduction isn't what you'd likely expect. There's no big reveal where we have finally met the mastermind, her spinning around announcing the genius behind the scenes. It's pretty low-key. She doesn't even announce her presence, she just says, "I'm home," after Hotaro asks if she was in the shower. And despite us being shown that it's hot enough outside that Hotaro was sweating despite the fans, Tomoe gets out of a steamy shower, giving us a bit of that oddball definition that Hotaro suggested in episode 7. Of course, we're also never shown Tomoe's eyes, which inspire mystery and intrigue around this character with such an outsized influence over the events of the show thus far. At the pool itself, we get this great disconnect between the music and Chitanda, Mayaka, and Satoshi's experience versus Hotaro's. The sounds are upbeat, those three are laughing and having a blast, but Hotaro can't be bothered. Even when Chitanda splashes water in his face, which would normally get some kind of exasperated reaction or at least serve as a wake-up call, he just sits there staring at her. That's not to say that he's some statue. The glances he throws Chitanda's way are enough to reinforce his interest, but that the emotional spectrum that he normally occupies has shrunk. Or to use Sekitani Jun arc imagery, fewer shades of gray, verging on being colorless. Just there. The camera moves and pans, tilts, and tracks for the other three characters, but is stationary in every Hotaro shot. And that relevance to shot composition continues through to them eating lunch. Like this shot, which conveniently cuts Hotaro out, further giving the sense of his isolation from the group. Even when the group is shot as a whole, Hotaro's face isn't shown, while we get reactions from everyone else to his non-engagement. Of course, everyone is aware that Hotaro's not being his usual self. Not much has changed from the end of episode 11 after all, which becomes very apparent when Chitanda attempts to bridge the gap that Hotaro has created between himself and everyone else. Though he doesn't engage initially, a discussion of talent brings us back to the personal crisis of the movie mystery arc. Hotaro's statement about the swimmer, a special person can accomplish greatness and a normal person cannot, and the follow-up, him stating that it doesn't matter if he wants to be special or not since he's normal regardless, is pretty fascinating. It's a stark contrast to episode 10's discussion with Satoshi, where he said that Satoshi could become a great Sherlockian if he wanted to be, while questioning his own role. The conclusion that Hotaro seemed to take away from his interactions with Irisu is that if you're normal, there's nothing you can do to become special. It's simply fate, which would seem to be Satoshi's mindset in that conversation when he turns away from Hotaro. But we'll come back to the authenticity of that in a future video. Chitanda takes this concept of what it means to be special and completely upends it. Being special is more personal for her, as is practically everything else. And she views Hotaro as special, in the same way that Mayaka and Satoshi are special, because they're all special to her. Hotaro takes issue with this more individualized viewpoint, to which Chitanda closes the gap between them to restate that it doesn't matter if it's personal or generic, special is special. People can become special to others. It's not some universally predetermined reality. So Chitanda has started to clean up the mess that Irisu made by stating that Hotaro was special without meaning it, by being completely earnest in her belief that Hotaro is special, even if it's not in the grand way that Irisu meant. This isn't enough to knock him out of his funk, but it's a step in the right direction, at least by forcing the question of why did it matter to Hotaro to be special. The answer might already be obvious at this point, but I think the rest of the episode does a good job of outlining it. After getting dragged into yet another mystery, this time by the power of white bikinis in combination with Chitanda's eyes, the Classics Club decides how to split up to find the missing piercing. Hotaro silently refuses to do so, leading Satoshi to break down the responsibilities before chatting with Hotaro about the job. He asks about the lifeguarding job in regard to Hotaro's motto, which Hotaro had not thought about. After Hotaro finally retorts, Satoshi lights up and states that Hotaro needs to respond to things, otherwise he's just boring. The difference between gray and colorless to throw way back to that episode 4 bike ride. Mayaka picks up shortly thereafter by stating that the emotionless Hotaro is far worse than the low-energy Hotaro, more or less stating the same as Satoshi, just in her more confrontational and direct style. I personally like this moment a lot because it shows the grudging respect between the two in a way that makes it clear that Hotaro values Mayaka, as opposed to the other way around as has been shown in the past, like in episode 6. And as Hotaro calls everyone over to solve the mystery, he takes a deep breath and reaffirms to himself that it's okay. Like he's still a bit traumatized over getting it wrong before, but now he's confident in this theory, or that this is such a low stakes matter that getting it wrong isn't that big of a deal, or most likely that surrounded by his friends, he can outline a theory and they'll help him get to the finish line, which is what Mayaka and Chitanda do by proving evidence in the form of the carry. And when Chitanda more or less restates that he's special, this time by saying that his deduction skill is amazing, Hotaro finally responds like he used to. He's soft reset back to his usual self. It's not that he hasn't learned anything from the movie mystery arc, it's just that he's not letting that negative experience make him worse off. His cynicism, as Satoshi and Mayaka call it, are important for the balance in their friend group, and when he's off, they're all off. Which brings us to the ending and the question posed earlier with Hotaro and why it mattered to be special. As Satoshi and Mayaka head out, Hotaro says that one should be glad to be needed. And Chitanda states that she needed his help like usual, which cuts us to a shot of two young children, a young boy trying to help cheer up a young girl. And Hotaro voices over that it might not be so bad. The two children are obviously an allusion to Hotaro and Chitanda, and it makes it clear that Hotaro wants to be helpful to people. That's why he didn't turn down his sister when she needed someone to help fill a job for the day, why he joined the Classics Club in the first place, why he agreed to help Irisu, why he doesn't turn down Chitanda all the time, and if he was a deductive genius, if he was special, he'd be able to help more people by helping to solve problems. Hotaro's desire to be helpful to people, to be special to them, is in direct conflict with his own motto, which is fascinating in its own right. This dichotomy of character, this active choice to be gray despite this natural tendency towards expending energy, is something that is at the core of the entire series. A constant conflict that moves one way with Sekitani Jun before careening back the other with the movie mystery. And as we head out of the OVA and into the second half of the show, we've returned to a sort of equilibrium. He had gone too far towards a colorless outlook, and now he's come back to that person struggling between rose color and gray, while maintaining his growth as a character and how he understands himself and his friends. He's not the same person who in episode 4 stated that he didn't care what Satoshi thought of him, or thought of Chitanda as an airhead in episode 2. Here is a character who returns to normal because those close to him were worried about him, and he's able to trust them. He doesn't have to worry about being used and discarded by Chitanda, Mayaka, and Satoshi. And so while he's gained this knowledge and strengthened his bonds, the conflict between gray and rose color is back in full force. This is maybe most clear when he takes a moment to reflect on the day, and starts questioning his job in the context of his motto like Satoshi asked him to, before deciding that this is indeed something he has to do, and complaining about it in true Hotaro fashion. But we'll chat more about that conflict when we come back with the next arc, right after the OP. Hope you enjoyed. Leave a like and comment with your thoughts, subscribe for more videos, and follow me on Twitter for my live analyses and future projects. Link in the description. We'll be back real soon with another video, but until then, thanks for watching.